Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about the idea of ratios, rates, and proportions. We're going to define each of these and maybe showing an example as to how to tackle or calculate whenever we see a problem like this. Let's establish the first one, which is a ratio. So what is a ratio? A ratio is a way to compare two numbers. So sometimes we like to say like apples to oranges. Sometimes we like to say, like miles per hour. These are very two common examples into what we're comparing. In the example of like miles per hour, we're comparing the number of miles compared to the number of hours. That is what we define as a ratio. We'll actually go more in depth as to how this is also another thing that we call a rate, but we'll get into that in a minute. So if we're trying to compare two numbers, what is a way that we can write this? If we're trying to compare two numbers, we always write something like this. We're going to put A for whatever number that is to B. So how do we pronounce it? We say it's A to B. So the example from apples to oranges, that's a way that we can compare something. So let's actually just write as an example what could be a ratio. Let's say I said 5 apples to 2 oranges. What would I write that as the ratio? So I would literally just write the same thing. So I would just say 5 apples. Instead of the word 2, I put colon, and then 2 oranges. One thing to note when you write this, you don't have to write the words anymore. You just have to write simply the numbers, 5 to 2. And so that's a ratio. Now, to talk about more about the miles per hour, we actually call that a rate. So yes, it's still a ratio. The only difference is that with this, a rate has different units. So what's the definition of rate? It's a ratio with different units. So let's say, for example, I wanted to find out the rate of like a car, right? And normally when you drive, you would say like, okay, I'm going 70 miles per hour. So we're going to try to write this as a rate or as a ratio. And so we're going to do the same thing as before, comparing two numbers. Well, clearly I see the first one, 70 miles. And then if I look at this per hour, it's referring to 1 hour. Okay, so now I see the second number. So let's make it into a ratio once more. We're going to say 70 miles, colon, 1 hour. And then we can just write it as just the two numbers, 70 to 1. Another way that we can write rates is as a fraction. So if I'm going to write this as a ratio into a fraction, I'm just going to put the 70 up top like this and write 70 miles. And on the bottom for my fraction, I'm going to put 1 hour. And so that's what a rate is. A rate is going to be written as either a ratio, such as the 70 to 1, or you can write it as a fraction, such as 70 over 1. Okay, then the last one that we're going to do is this idea of a proportion. What is a proportion? So a proportion is the equality of two ratios. So sometimes like when we want to cook something, like let's imagine I'm trying to make like cookies, like here's imagine some cookies. Clearly it has a lot of recipes. So for instance, let's just say that maybe for 10 cookies, I needed to use, 50 grams of sugar. A lot of sugar in each cookie. Well, if you clearly see this, sometimes we want to compare these 10 cookies to maybe a larger amount. Let's say you have like a party and you get like 30 people to get cookies. Well, in this case, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, okay, there's 30 cookies, but we don't know how much sugar that would take. It would take more than 50 for sure, but we don't know how much it would be altogether. To that, we create this thing called a proportion. So looking at these two kind of scenarios, we're going to make them once more into a ratio or a rate, and then see how we can compare the two. Looking at this first one, we see that it's 10 cookies and 50 grams of sugar. So I'm going to write that as a ratio, 10 to 50. Okay, I can also write this as a fraction too. So I can say it equals 10C, if I just wanted to write that, over 50S. S standing for sugar, C standing for cookie. I can even do the same with this new 30 cookies, but we don't know the sugar. I'm going to write it as a ratio. So I'm going to say 30 to a question mark. And I can even write that as a rate. 30C over question mark S. Well, knowing that I'm going to use the same recipe, this is the power of a proportion. I'm going to make them equal to each other. We're going to do 10 over 50 equals to 30 over the question mark. And so our question is, how do we figure out these grams of sugar? Well, luckily, one of the ways that we are able to do this is this idea of cross multiplication. And so how do we find out this cross multiplication? Well, one thing is that since both of these are fractions, what we can do is we can multiply across just like this. So we're going to draw an X right here in the middle. And remember that I can multiply across the fraction. So in this case, I'm going to label, instead of this question mark, I'm going to label it as an X for my variable. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to say, okay, 10 times X. What's 10 times X? Well, 10 times X gives me 10X. Okay, and then I look at the next one. So I look at 50 times 30, because that's what I'm multiplying across. Well, using my calculator, 50 times 30 is 1,500. Knowing that I have these two as my numbers to multiply, I'm going to make them equal. So I'm going to say 10x equals to 1,500. I don't like that 10 because it helps me get closer to my answer. So if I want to get rid of it, I do the opposite. The opposite of the multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 10. 10s cancel out, and all we're left with is that x equals 150. So that's my final answer. I have 150 grams of sugar for my 30 cookies. And that's essentially how we cross multiply. When you set up a proportion, you look at two different ways to compare using a rate. For example, this one was 10 over 50, and the next one is going to be 30 over something. We made them equal to each other, and then we use cross multiplication to solve it. And that is the idea of rates, ratios, and proportions. I'll see you in the next one.